It's Friday. We're all happy and excited as the week ends and the weekend is about to begin. But before we do that, we have to have some discussions. Good morning and welcome to Talking Point here on WESN, the Content Capsule. I'm your co-host, Mr. Keaton Shaw. I'm very pleased to have you alongside with us this final day of the week, Friday the 10th of June 2022. Later on, we'll be welcoming our guest commentator this morning, and by 8:30, hopefully we'll have our guests joining us for a great discussion. I certainly look forward to that as we continue where we left off earlier this week in relation to racism and politics here in Trinidad and Tobago. But before I get too ahead of myself, let me introduce my co-host and my colleague. He's alongside me this morning, Mr. Sean Michael Small. Good morning, Sean.
Good morning, Keaton. And it's almost kind of weird these mornings because you wake up and, of course, there's always stories that you're not aware of that is going to be published overnight. And when you wake up in the morning, you're going to discover what new happened. And these days, the unfortunate new news just tends to be with regards to the crime, the violent situation. It's pretty heavy. And it's strange. I don't necessarily know what to say because I used to follow the crime situation back around the time when the PNM now came into power. And I thought then crime was pretty heavy. I mean, I knew crime was heavy. I was tracking it. But now I'm just left to wonder exactly what is it are people really making of it? Is there any sense of agency among the population? Is there any desire for change, or are we just, continuing our lives as normal, business as usual, but on our end now, not on the politicians' end, right? On our end, we're just accepting it, and it is what it is, until something happens to somebody we know, somebody close to us, and then all of a sudden this is the worst thing ever.
I think because there's so many social, economical, and even geographical factors that are plaguing society right now. It's very stressful. There's so much that is taking place that people have to take on, and I believe that given the situation, people are now just trying to survive, by any means necessary. I think we all want better. We're all hoping for better. Are we pushing for better? Perhaps not as we should be doing, but because of the situation on a whole, I think people are just, there's too much happening. We just need to survive. We just want to see tomorrow. And when tomorrow comes, we want to survive it and see the day after. And people are living day by day. And you're wondering whether or not we're concerned about it and whether or not we're addressing it. Let me give you a statistic shared yesterday by the Minister of Education. Did you know for this term 3 of 2021-2022, the academic year, bear in mind, I believe terms 1 was virtual, term 2 partially virtual, because they came back out for the last 2 weeks of the term, and then this term, they after Easter, all students were back out. Thus far, Sean, and that's been a month, there have been 1,318 suspensions across secondary schools for roughly 30 different offences.
One of the interesting things, and our colleague Andy Johnson pointed us out, we were having a discussion, ultimately we don't know. Why is it that it seems as though fighting among the girl students, it's more publicized? There's been multiple videos of big brawls, which includes teachers either trying to break up the brawl or being part of the brawl in one case that I could remember.
Yes.
Of course, the recent infamous stabbing now has to some extent maybe shaken up the nation just a little bit, but it's straight. You would think it would be the other way around, that boys would be quicker to throw punches and kicks and disregard authority figures in order to fight. And it's almost as though we're not really prepared for the new angles this thing is going to hit us with.
I'll be very honest with you. I think we live in an immature society. What do I mean by that? I mean that with fights amongst female students, how it's videotaped, what you hear taking place in the background, the laughter, the lack of intervention, or if there's any intervention, it's not to stop the fight, it's others trying to back up their friend, or however you want to deem it. people see fights among female students now and amongst females as entertainment. Because they're jeering them on. How she could tell you that? How she could do that? Yeah, get her this and that. Laughing in the background, videotaping it. It's become a form of entertainment.
But you see that with regards to when there's crime on the road and people pull out their cell phones to videotape a fight or a brawl going out in front of a bar or what have you. I've seen that before.
But how often in comparison?
Well, because when I was going to school, yes, people won't necessarily jump to break up the fight immediately, but I think that's usually because most fights that I've seen, they happen so fast that they didn't last for too long, and they didn't go to the same extent that some of these, what you see on these videos now. So could it be that it's just a product of a new age where I wonder, because of the pandemic, we're so disconnected from reality, we're so accustomed to having some kind of separation between us and everybody else, that now the thought of, hey, something is happening, I should get involved to stop something if it's wrong from happening, if we've lost even more than before. Because like I said, that phenomenon, that kind of spectator syndrome, I think there's an actual name for it. I'm not sure if it's a clinical name, but there's an actual name that it's known by online, where you just take out your cell phone and you're filming before you actually do something. Somebody's robbing a house, you film them robbing the house. You don't actually call the police. Somebody got hit by a car, you film them struggling inside the road. You don't actually call an ambulance. So we know that happened, but I'm wondering if now, because of the pandemic, there's even a bit more of a sense of, well, I'm not involved. That has nothing to do with me.
Yes and no. In our time, when we were going to school, and I'm certain that, I don't know to the extent it happens now, but quite often, our parents would look at us and say, the best thing that you can do is not get involved. Don't put yourself in a situation where you're in the center of any sort of argument or fight, so don't get involved. And it's become two-way. We're now preaching, you need to get involved, you need to intervene in order to stop the argument or the fight from persisting. You need to intervene if you, as my coach pointed out, call the relevant authorities for whatever the situation may be. But then you don't want to intervene where you make yourself a target. Well, and that's the difficulty that we're seeing now. And you alluded to the fact that teachers, there's at least 2 videos I remember with teachers, there's one at least I remember with parents fighting with the students. And I think people for some reason, we speak about mental health, we speak about the fact that these students were home for 2 years, because the other half of the statistic is that the majority of those who have been suspended are between Form 1 to 3, right? And that's very important to note. But I don't know if it's a level of maturity. I don't know if it's this mentality that when you enter high school, you have to prove yourself from, don't mess with me, I will stand up for myself. If I have to fight, I'll fight. In male schools, they have to prove their dominance when you're in Form 1, because everybody, all of a sudden, you're in a classroom with new fellas that you haven't seen before, met before, and you have to prove yourself, you have to stand up for yourself. I don't know if it's all that's encompassing with the conversation with mental health. But the mere fact that we're seeing that taking place tells me that obviously, people do not care. We will fight, we will argue, and whatever happens afterwards. Because, let's be honest, what's the worst that's going to happen to me? I'm going to get suspended. They don't like to expel students.
Well, I mean, the girl with the knife, she got expelled. And I think...
Because that was an extreme case.
Well, true. But I think you're onto something, because Forms 1 to 3... they lack these social skills just because they lack interaction for 2 years, and at their age, the level of maturity would not necessarily be there as a Form 5 or Form 4 student even, who's a little bit older, but also has a more important and pressing goal in front of them, right? They have exams coming up that's very important for their future. So they don't necessarily have the time to give those extra considerations, like I worry about my place on the totem pole in the environment of my class in school. But with a Form 1 student who went through 2 years of primary school being online, they've just finished their exam, their big exam. They have time to breathe, and they're going into a new environment, as you said, but they don't even have the relevant socialization of the previous 2 years in primary school to kind of prep them, well, how do I interact with people, just in general, in Form 1. And of course, 2 and 3, you more or less have a similar story moving up.
But to add to that as well, Sean, when I look at my experience, I don't know if you had the same experience when you went to Fatima, but when I was in high school, I remember that when we entered Form 1 and even to a certain degree in Form 2, everybody would have an argument with each other. People used to get slapped across their face, punched for just looking at somebody the wrong way, or most recently when this entire thing happened with you stepping on somebody's shoes, you had to get down and clean it with your hand, or a fight will ensue. And then when we got to Form 3, Form 4, and this is the interesting part, why I said that statistic is important, there was a greater sense of camaraderie and brotherhood. There was a greater sense of some sort of harmony and unity amongst your peers. And I suppose that's the immaturity. We entered fighting, people were fighting, people were arguing for the pettiest and stupidest of reasons. But I think it was that mentality of male dominance. And then when you reached a certain level, like Form 3, Form 4, there was a greater sense of camaraderie. So I don't know if it's that after a year or two in high school, you start to develop that level of thinking, that mentality, that level of maturity. And that is where the situation improves.
Ironically, for me, it was a little bit different. I found that a lot of these students, they did not know themselves or know their place, but they had a more patient approach to develop their role almost. So everybody was eager, everybody in a way to put their best foot forward, of course, because everything is new. And of course, it's almost like when you have new employees, you don't know what you don't know, so you're not jaded yet with regards to certain aspects of your day-to-day life. Everything is still fresh, so there's still a certain amount of enthusiasm, whether it is something that suits your personality or not. And then once we got into the higher forms, the students, while we were still mellow, because most of the fights in my classes were in the lower school as well. While we were still mellow, for the most part, everybody kind of, they figured out where their corner was and they stayed in it. We didn't necessarily have any sort of central group or grouping, It's just everybody had their niche, and it was a lot of niches. But Forms 1 to 2 especially, because the classes changed in Form 3. So everybody had to meet new people and re-socialize in Form 3. Forms 1 to 2, we were generally chill. There would be fights, but it would be personal things. And I guess that's why getting involved was that you weren't necessarily so quick to get involved, because it actually was just between those two guys, something they're sorting out. It kind of blew up real quick. And as fast as it blows up, it would end. Nothing like the brawls that we see where you even have adults getting involved. Usually once a teacher or somebody like that shows up, things cool down real quick, because we never took it that far. There was never a reason to take it that far.
You've raised a very valuable point. Excellent, actually, if I may say so. First of all, in classrooms or even in forms, you'll always have cliques.
Yeah.
Always.
But it wasn't as though people like you can't line with them because you line with them. It wasn't like that.
No. Yeah. Even in my
these are
time,
guys.
Like
guys are a little bit more
even in my
mellow
time,
with regards to that.
It wasn't like that. But there was always, groups. But there was never, okay, you can't line with us. That was never the case. But the valuable point that I thought that you raised is that when one is transitioning from primary school to secondary school, you're right. They don't know themselves. They don't know who they are. We're going into a new environment. We're experiencing this for the first time. And that level of patience that your peers would have displayed or you would have displayed, that particular characteristics, and even in my time, there still was patience. Yes, you had your bickering and your fights, but there still was a level of patience. Perhaps that patience has now gone, as you pointed out. We had that patience to a certain, you had that patience, I had that patience to a certain degree, and now you're not seeing that patience at all.
Society has changed.
So finding themselves now has become part of the problem. Interesting enough, look at it that way. A student transitioning from primary school to secondary school in finding themselves and their identity has probably become a part of the problem. Maybe it's incorrect the way I'm phrasing it, but...
Not just that, but we had the benefit of uninterrupted, we're going to school. Primary to secondary, but we're still going, right? Like the Form 3s now, they had the primary school experience, but they didn't really have a secondary school experience, and they dumped into Form 3. Mm-hmm. So again, I can't even begin to imagine what the shock would be like, because when you're at that age, you don't do things intentionally. You don't know, you don't have long-term motivations and machinations and you can't figure out these things for the most part. You just kind of react.
Yeah.
You just are. You know, you don't know. You're not even thinking through the concept of where is my place in this society of my class.
And that reaction may not necessarily be rational. Yeah, and that reaction may not be rational. Yeah. Well, folks, it's interesting. I mean, the statistics that we're seeing and what we're being presented, I don't think it's entirely difficult to analyze. But are the authorities having that conversation? From 2015 till now, we've seen the numbers increase. Anyway, folks, let's take a break here now on the program. When we return, we continue where we left off on Tuesday with a colleague of ours who is with us via Zoom. And when we start that conversation, we'll welcome our guest to continue from a different perspective. Stay tuned to Talking Points here on WESN, the Content Capital.
We dare you to dream, to see beyond the struggle, to envision the possibilities, to live life with unlimited vision. Ferreira Optical supports you with complete eyewear starting at only $795. Let's make those dreams a reality. So book your visit via 227-7000, WhatsApp message 278-2878, or at FerreiraOptical.com today. We dare you to keep going. Ferreira Optical says, don't limit your vision.
A reminder from WESN. We urge you to protect yourself and others from the spread of COVID-19. Stay safe by taking some simple precautions. Clean your hands often. Use soap and water or an alcohol-based hand rub. Maintain a safe distance from anyone who is coughing or sneezing. Wear a mask. Don't touch your eyes, nose or mouth. Cover your nose and mouth with your bent elbow or a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Stay at home. If you have a fever, cough and difficulty breathing, seek medical attention. Following the above can help us all to help each other.
What message do we send to our politicians? This is what I worry about. What message do we send to our politicians when we kind of make it clear that when it comes to substantive issues, when it comes to the guarding of the public purse, when it comes to having above board dealings while in public office, those things we don't care too much about. But when you get on a platform and you say something offensive, you hurt my feelings, that's when I'll, come out and placard and demand your resignation. I think that is a poor message to send to people in power.
That was a clip from our very own site here on WESN on Thursdays. Sule was talking to the host of the Alternative Perspective podcast, Mr. Jude Campbell, and they were going into the topic of race in TNT. I think the whole situation blew up and Sule wanted to dive into that. Check out that episode because Mr. Campbell, he has some very good perspectives with regards to how he sees as the way forward for TNT with regards to race. And I think, yes, it's very interesting what he said there in that clip, because there's a lot of important things that seem to, we note them, but that you don't get the response as when a politician makes, a targeted emotional attack. I mean, the irony being, Anna Roberts, he basically said, we don't do those things, and then basically threw out the script that he was talking from and made a targeted emotional attack. Mm-hmm. And we know that very often, the government tries to be very corporate and professional, and you just give them, 2 seconds, and they could go straight into it, right? Trying to defend themselves with mud. The Minister of National Security right now, usually when he's getting questioned in Parliament, I think right now is the best example of how bad it could get.
I actually have a catalogue of videos of what you described with the Minister of National Security when he's asked questions, his responses. But to also contribute to this conversation for the rest of the program, we're joined by our colleague, our good friend actually, Mr. Camille Pascal, who's with us via Zoom. He's a former youth parliamentarian. Good morning, Camille. Welcome back to Talking Point.
Yes, good morning, Keaton, and good morning, Sean. Good morning to all of viewers and listeners this morning. It's certainly a pleasure to be on a Friday, a hot and sunny Friday, it looks like.
It certainly is a hot and sunny Friday, but that's going to change. We're due for more rain this weekend.
Oh yes, please. Oh, yes, please.
But anyway, so to start off this discussion, Sean, I think maybe we should hint at the question of the day. Give the viewers the opportunity to think, but also perhaps give Camille the opportunity to answer that question.
Yeah, the Royal Castle question of the day. And I mean, at the end of the day, we're asking, is it politics or people to blame for the racism in TNT? And by people, of course, we mean the society at large outside of the politicians and those who actively campaign. So is it the political class or is it the rest of us? Who is to blame for the racism?
Exactly. And that's an interesting question. And Camille, I want your thoughts on this, because very much a discussion that has been lacking.
Yeah, sure. So what I do think is that it would have been started, I should say, by the politicians way back when. However, that has now trickled down into society and into the society of Trinidad and Tobago. And I don't want to put a blanket and say all of Trinidad and Tobago engage in such behavior, but it is not limited to, but it is part of a large section of the population that engage in racism. However, having regard to the fact that politicians would have started it since way back when, and it has now been ingrained in the society, and it's not a good thing that it's ingrained, but the people on the ground, the supporters of the political parties, and just the ordinary people have continued that particular behavior and have continued to express racist sentiments regarding just their very neighbors. Mm-hmm. So I think it's a matter of what is in the head has now come down to the people, and they have simply continued.
Well, it's a good point, because we could look at it from the historical perspective, and we speak about that we cannot forget history conveniently. And we have to look at where we come from and how we've developed as a nation to where we are. And the thing is that, in my opinion, to answer that question, I think it's both. You're right. I can't put a blanket statement and say that every individual in TNT is racist. I can't say that. People may have racist thoughts, or even certain things might be deemed as racist, such as stereotyping. But one thing that I've noticed, especially in the last 10 to 15 years more so, is that politicians more than ever are playing on the racial division, because people in Trinidad and Tobago, it seems as though that they are pushing a racial division. And again, let me be quite frank, not everybody's racist. But because they're pushing that racial division, and because there's racist thoughts, and even in some instances racist agendas, from the time a politician portrays anything associated with division, people jump on it, are quick to defend it, but chastise the other. And this goes for any side you want to look at.
Or they will use the racism of the other side to excuse their side. That's basically, I think, what we saw with some of the arguments. Generally, that's what I see. Now, ironically, I have a couple of points that would suggest that I agree with you all, that at least the people have a significant part to play, if not a majority part to play. But I actually think it mostly comes down to the politicians, right? Now, granted, yes, we will see people just be racist regardless of politics. And we know that it to some extent, the response, I alluded to it with Mr. Campbell's point that he made, the response you see for insensitive attacks is bigger than the response you get from actual issues of millions and billions of dollars being wasted here or wasted there. You're not seeing the same kind of fervor. With that said, I do think that ultimately it trickles down from the leaders, and the leaders, more importantly, are not doing anything to stop it, to curb it, to try to get people to understand, let's not do this, because by allowing us to do it, we encourage the other side to respond in the same manner, and then the division just keeps going further and further apart. Because ultimately speaking, if you leave the population alone, we know that in areas where the demographics are mixed, right? There is no major division. We don't have areas in Port of Spain and San Fernando where you have Indian and Afro-Trinidadian families living close to each other, and because of the proximity, there's a war, and they just can't get along. They get along.
We don't?
Our cultures mix when in areas where our societies, not the wider TNT society, but specific communities, neighborhoods are mixed. There's greater integration. What you see is communities that are homogeneous, right? They still have a bit of resistance, not because, I don't necessarily think it's because of racism, it's more just because, well, those are outsiders. And outsiders always kind of, there's resistance to outsiders until eventually they warm up. I mean, take Tobago, for instance. Now that there's a larger and larger East Indian community in Tobago, I don't think there's the same kind of resistance or racism that you would necessarily see as before. And I think a lot of it is really more with Trinidadians being outsiders. Tobago has a resistance to Trinidadians. But once you come and live there in Tobago and you're part of the community and you contribute to the community, they'll accept you.
I think Tobago is a good example from it shows the disparity between Trinidad and Tobago. I think it's certainly one nation, but definitely two different entities. I might be stating the obvious because it's two separate islands, but I'm trying to point out the fact that though we're one nation and we're one people, Tobago society is very much different to Trinidad society.
Yeah, but on all groups, well, there will be resistance. It's just a natural occurring phenomenon.
But I cannot necessarily blame politicians, and I'm not making excuses to them, but the reason why I say that is because another thing that I've noticed, I've had these conversations often multiple times, and Kemi, I'll bring you back in. You know, if we put politics aside for one moment, the prevalence of black on black crime in society, it's strong. The prevalence of Indian versus Indian crime, hatred, division is also strong. People might not want to admit it, and it's a very, very controversial conversation. But there's a lot of division and classism with Indians versus Indians, and the same thing with black on black. And yet, when it comes to politics, it now becomes Indian versus black, black versus Indian, and we seem to forget Trinidad and Tobago.
That's it. So what I do think it's that it's a matter of politicians have done the work in terms of fueling racist agendas in Trinidad and Tobago. Whether or not you would like to admit it, and yes, I'm speaking to you, the viewer, they have done that across both parties. And yes, they probably would have apologized on certain occasions for remarks that they would have made. But in truth, and in all truth, what they have done has already become ingrained into the society. And that's why you see at around election time, that's when it becomes more prevalent, and a lot of politicians start speaking about race and tribal voting and a lot of other things. So it's a matter of really and truly what Keaton is saying is correct. Outside of the politics and outside of the elections, people generally live together and they live fine as one in Trinidad and Tobago. But immediately as the elections start, you begin to see that coming out of people. You look at Facebook, all social media, I should say, under the comments on certain news articles, and you see the reviews and the remarks of people. You hear it on the political platform. So politicians have truly done the work, and they just continue to fuel it every so often.
Well, we're going to take a break now, and when we return, I will ask our guest exactly what is the solution. How do we go about solving this issue? And this guest has definitely tried, and we'll talk to him about the experiences. But as we go for our Nescafe break, my friend, you have to fill up your cup.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm enjoying some dark roast today, a nice quick change from the Colombian brand. I felt like I needed a heavier cup to deal with somewhat heavier topics than what we had yesterday.
Well, folks, before we go to this break, let me tell you about the MIC Institute of Technology, the catalyst for developing technical and vocational competencies for national and regional industries through quality training, innovation, manufacturing, construction, and engineering products and services. MIC Institute of Technology is a unique entity operating as both a commercial industry and training institution. Thank you very much to MIC for their continued support here on the program. We now take this break, and when we return, well, as I said, hopefully we'll get a better understanding from a different perspective. Stay tuned.
Noah Powder put into a dangerous area, back of the net. It's 1-0 already.
Our Soca Warriors have emerged victorious against Bahamas. Now, they prepare to take on their next opponent. On Monday, 13th June, tune in to WESN Content Capital for live coverage of TNT versus St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Come show support for our Soca Warriors at the Hazley Crawford Stadium. Monday, 13th June, TNT versus St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Kick-off at 7 p.m. Let's build back TNT's football.
The issue, the continued rise in the price of flour and its impact on the cost of living in Trinidad and Tobago. How should we go about it? I want to ask you, what has been revealed to you about the state of vulnerability in the country because of this exercise and because of what we're going through? Is the government losing the war on the vaccine front?
The discussion should revolve around the common good for the greatest number of people in Trinidad and Tobago.
How do we inculcate a sense of respect and regard for people who may not be of your own political ilk or persuasion?
The communities are now being used by political opportunists. So
when the tables are turned, it's the same way. Okay, this has been 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson, and we'll see you next time.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Is it politics? What is it that nobody cares about sports?
The kind of support that sport used to get in the past is no longer here.
The thing is, taking a knee doesn't mean that that's the only thing you're doing on it.
Right.
Taking a knee along with other stuff.
Samantha, what are you looking forward to when you return home to Trinidad and Tobago after winning the title?
Thank you very much for speaking it into existence.
Is it no pressure on Nicholas Paul?
It makes me more motivated to work hard and to go out there and rep the red, white and black.
Why are we sending a team to the Winter Olympics?
There are a number of Trinbagonians who are in the diaspora and have grown up in winter sport. It's an opportunity that the Trinidad and Tobago Olympic Committee will not close the door on.
I also believe in the players that we have. Once you can motivate the players, you can get the best out of them.
If you live with someone who's tested positive for COVID-19 and has to self-isolate at home, take care of them from a distance and reduce their movement around the house. Give them space, a designated space, and open those windows. If you have to be in contact, mask up, both of you. If you work, stay home from work and don't go out, not even to the grocery or pharmacy. And remember, no visitors allowed. Limit the contact to limit the spread.
The Trinidad and Tobago Red Cross Society. Mission-based, people-focused, community-driven.
Welcome back to the conversation. Now, alongside us this morning is a gentleman who I feel very privileged to be having this conversation with. He is the former political leader of the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago, which he formed in 2001. When he formed it, he said it was his vision to unite the races of Trinidad and Tobago under one political party. Alongside Mr. Sean Michael Small, myself, and Camille Pascal, is Mr. Steve Alvarez. Good morning, Mr. Alvarez. Welcome to the program.
Good morning, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, thank you very much. Maruga Tableland, a man from Maruga Tableland, as he likes to describe himself. But that, in creating your party, usually people are fighting against another party. We're seeing parties now created to fight the two mainstays. But it's interesting that in 2001, when you formed your party, it was to unite races under one political entity. So tell us a bit about your experience, especially going as far back as 2001. Was the prevalence of that racial division and hatred, I describe it very much as hatred, then what we're seeing today?
Well, our racial situation in terms of the politics has been like this for decades. So it's not something that it shows up its face periodically, but it goes all the way back to pre-independence. Mm-hmm. There was, I remember the stories about the Marlborough Hall meetings where Eric Williams and I think it was Capel Davis, it was, had to go outside and have a discussion, listen, because they couldn't come together on independence. So they actually met outside and said, listen, we're going back in now to negotiate, and this is what we're going to do. And that's how they eventually settled. So it's been like this for years. Up to yesterday, for example, I was reading an article in the newspaper where someone boldly stated that Eric Williams described the Indian community as a recalcitrant minority. And I laughed because that's not what happened. I think that in his effort to try to unite the races, he said that, listen, the only reason we are not getting at this level of unity is because of a recalcitrant minority within the Indian community. Mm. But they did not see it. Mm-hmm. So for political gain, they say he deemed all Indians a recalcitrant minority. And that's how could you deem a whole group of people a minority? He says there's a minority within the group that is causing us to be separated. When I formed the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago, I recognized then, and as I do now, that if our country has to develop, you need our best engineers, our best doctors, we need our best people. And those best people don't come from one sector of a society.
Yes.
It comes from the agricultural sector, it comes from the intellectual sector, it comes from the business sector, and those people come in various colors and shades. And the only color that should matter for us is the red, white, and black. Because if we come together, then we are exceedingly powerful force. And that's what I've been trying to get to people, that all the nonsensical things that we have to deal with, whether it's crime, whether it's poor infrastructure, all those things can be solved by us, the people, but not by sects within the community. And the Democratic Party of Trinidad and Tobago was supposed to, and still is, because the party still exists, and the reason why I've resigned as political leader is because I don't want any political party to be about a person. It should be about us and country. So I would like to see someone say, listen, I want to vie for leader of the Democratic Party because it's a party that allows us as a people. What I'm seeing now is that a lot of people, well, God, there's a plethora of new parties now.
Yes.
But they're sects. I like this one supporting this group, and this one, we can't build a nation by sects and groups and little groups of people. And that's why, for example, the two major parties continue to this agenda of race, because that's how they get their support. They know that all I have to do is say Calcutta ship or say something like that, and some subliminal message, call Shishila or something, any kind of, or say slavery. Once you use those little keywords subliminally, you have your support base saying, yeah, but we can't build a nation that way. And politics should be about us as a people building a nation. How do we deal with the fact that the criminal gangs are taking over our communities? How do we deal with the fact that there's a global food shortage coming and we should be actually invested in more agriculture? How do we deal with the fact that we have to find alternative sources of income from the energy sector? And how do we recognize the tremendous potential we have in terms of natural resources to build our tourism? We can be the tourism capital of the Caribbean because of what we have.
But Mr. Alvarez, if you've noticed, those conversations were put on the back burner this week, and what really dominated headlines was the conversations surrounding the spat between one political leader and the other, and both justifying their positions and their stances. And I'm starting to wonder if that in itself, on those platforms, those leaders, what's causing us? The question we asked this morning is, are politics or the people to blame for the level of racism in the country? Are we now losing our identity amongst ourselves because of our leaders? Or are we losing our identities because we're forgetting about the common things that we fought for? And this goes back to an editorial that you produced earlier this week, where East Indians and Afro-Trinidadians, we had to fight for an education. At one point, a simple little thing like a driver's license we had to fight for and argue for. It seems as though we've forgotten that.
Well, one of the things, especially when we talk about education, people don't recognize that in this country, at one time, you only had 10 persons, 10 out of this entire country, that could have accessed free secondary education. And so I remember reading C.L.R. James' book that he actually got the scholarship at 10 years of age. And they said to him, well, listen, don't take it now. Leave it for somebody else, because you're so brilliant, you can make it the next year. And he did that. So he left for the next year at 11. So we've had a common history of struggling for what is required. And it wasn't an African history, it wasn't an Indian history. People don't recognize, for example, in labor, it was Tubal Uriah Buzz Butler, who was an African person, and Colonel Rienzi, who was an Indian person. Yeah. And they together fought for workers' rights and so on. We've always had that common fight for whatever we want. But in a society where the politicians have absolutely no valid topic to bring to the nation. They don't have solutions to the problem that we have. So what do? Rather than say, listen, this is how we solve crime, or this is how we deal with the economy, it's easier to make race an issue. And because it makes your people, I mean, I'm seeing people on both sides coming up and say, I support this one and I support that one, because they don't understand how sensitive this is. We don't have those issues. The issues that we have are issues in infrastructure failure. I mean, you just have to pass the Caroni Bridge and go south. If you had to drive through Barrackport today, you would be, I mean, you'd be surprised to see that this is a roadway.
And I did that recently, by the way.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
It's terrible, but people don't know that. People don't know that the road to Rio Claro and Mayaro is so bad. So they don't understand that there are communities in Trinidad and Tobago at this time that spend 3 weeks without water. You know, so those are issues. Those are not African issues or Indian issues. Those are national issues. You have people in areas of Port of Spain right now where the maxi taxis have to pay a gangster, so they can park to pick up.
Yes, and we've been told that recently. Camille, I think you have a question.
Yeah. So, Mr. Alvarez, we understand that it would have been persons that would have fought for things that we have right now in terms of some of the benefits that we enjoy. But why do you think that that some citizens hold on to what they are preached by political leaders in terms of racism and their racist agendas? Why do you think citizens hold on to that?
The question is, why do you think citizens hold on to what politicians preach with the racism? Why do they hold on to it?
Well, I think one of the most common thing is that people they identify. They look at themselves and they see themselves as a leader. You see yourself as an African and you see yourself as Indian. And it's easy, it's just optical. But the reality is, which is really, really, really funny, the reality is the African Party has not done anything targeted to support or to enhance the quality of the African sector. And when you have the UNC in power, there's no targeted efforts to fix the things in the Indian community, because you have actually politicians whose first obligation is to their financiers.
Yeah.
And so if with the UNC in power, the people of Barrackpore and Siparia and South Trinidad and Central and all those areas that have been staunch supporters of the UNC, you would think that, wow, now we're going to see some development. Now you're going to see catchment bases in Barrackpore, so there's no longer floods and all that. You're going to see investment. No, that did not happen. When you talk about the PNM in power, you think that perhaps now you'll see Laventille, Despa's place will now be renovated and there'll be security so that people can go up the hill. But that doesn't happen. The financiers, you could see big contracts, whether it's NHA houses or roads or whatever, going to specific groups of people. And that happens because the financiers now are doing both parties. So it's at some time the people of African and Indian descent have ancestry has to recognize that we can't continue this path. The country cannot, and this is the point that I've been trying to make for over decades now, that the country cannot develop if you're going to alienate one group or one sector of our society.
I mean, it's funny that you gave the response, and it's true, because I see it in other jurisdictions, right? I see it in American politics, where you don't actually see the politics play on demographic lines, but not the actual effort now to say, okay, you voted for me, I'm going to actually fix your problem. So it's interesting that you say that way, because I kind of agree with Camille's question as well, because I remember what you said. You said that political parties should not be about one person, and I do wonder, well, because it is about the leader. It starts with the leader, right? As much as I think the PNM is more decentralized than the UNC, it still starts with Keith Rowley. And because he is of one race and Kamala Persad-Bissessar is of another race, it's almost as though, and this is the thing, if the voters of the respective communities are not necessarily being rewarded for voting in the party, are not getting their issues solved by the party that's supposed to be of their racial demographic, you know, why is it that we are so hooked on these, and you can't even say cult of personalities really, because our leaders are not that special. We compare them to Mia Mottley in Barbados, and they fall short, although a lot of world leaders fall short, I would argue, to Mia Mottley. You know, Kamala has tried multiple times to associate herself with Barack Obama and that imagery, that type of campaign, that type of messaging, and I don't think it works. Dr. Rowley, well, he's just done Dr. Rowley things. But we seem so caught up in the cult of personality And I do have to wonder why, because it's true, like a switch will flip, and when you see the comments on social media, right, from the people, not from the politicians, I kind of get worried or scared, like, why does it have to go so far?
Well, Mr. Alvarez, I just wanted to add to that. I think the interesting thing is that a part of democracy is identity and constitutional rights, constitutional powers. But it seems as though too often we forget our identity and we become like sheeps to the shepherds, and those shepherds, of course, being those who stand on the platform. But with that, the solution now, how do we break out of that mentality of us having to be sheep, of us not knowing our identity? And I believe recently as well, you alluded to the fact that another political party is not the solution.
Yeah, well, I want to deal with one of the things that you said a while ago. Let's look at Kamala Persad-Bissessar, for example. The perhaps first and last time that she had an open interview on television about what you do was with Shelley Das.
Wow. Yes.
And that Shelley Das interview, she got upset because she couldn't answer whatever.
Yeah.
Since then, she's not had an interview. You cannot ask Kamala Persad-Bissessar, so what are we dealing with the economy?
Yeah.
What are we dealing with? What is your plan for uniting our country and bringing a nation? No. So,
and we've tried.
She's focused, very focused on her support group within the UNC.
Yes, that's
to make sure that she maintains that position. So she maintains that because she knows what to say to them, and to that group. She now has, I will make you a senator, I will make you a this, and if we get a chance to win, you can become a minister, and so on. It has absolutely nothing to do with how we build a country. The PNM, on the other hand, is one where the party, not the leader, but the entire party, is controlled by the financiers. They determine who becomes the leader, who gets membership, and that is a background, silent minority that you don't see.
Yes.
But parties could come and parties could go. The structure of the PNM is controlled by this group of people who, if you look at who finances the party, because a party to do an election is something like $50-60 million for a campaign. The PNM support base selling sugar cake and thing can't do that. But they are controlled by that group. And at some point, we as a people have to recognize that beyond the UNC and beyond the PNM, there's the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago have challenges, and the people of Tobago not only have challenges, but we have the expertise, people like yourselves. Intelligent young people who can take us where we need to be, who can do benchmarking against international standards and so on. And we have to find the strength. Indian and African, Douglas, everybody else have to find the strength to look at that red, white, and black and say, listen, it's about time we reject that sort of politics and we get into the politics of coming together. And that's not by forming 5 and 6 and 7 new parties, because everyone who feel that they're important, who feel that they have an answer, feels that the solution to that is to form a party.
Well, Mr. Steve Alvarez, I want to thank you. We have to end the discussion there simply because of news, but I welcome you back very soon to the program to continue this discussion. I don't want to lose sight of this at all. I think we've held off on it too long. But before we break for news, ladies and gentlemen, let us remind you of the Royal Castle question of the day. We are asking you, are politics or are people to blame for the racism here in Trinidad and Tobago? When we return and the phone lines are open, we give you the opportunity to respond and to have your thoughts to stay tuned to the program.
Seven is out. All day is in. WESN News on the hour.
Every day, we communicate through stories. Stories of ourselves, our challenges, our goals, our experiences, and our aspirations. Storytelling is an art that we have mastered. WESN Film Studios comprises a collaborative team of experts with extensive industry experience locally, regionally, and internationally. The ability of your business to successfully communicate with your preferred audience depends on the strength of the stories you tell. Your vision should be communicated in a high-quality, professional, and creative way. From concept to post-production, advertising to film, multi-camera productions, live events, streaming, and virtual conferencing, we are WESN Film Studio. Let your own unique voice be heard and your vision realized. Call us today at 628-5835 for your next production.
AM Prime on WESN, the only place from 6 to 7:30 a.m. where you can get the most analytical and thorough interviews and regional reports.
The Barbados Labour Party, led by the Prime Minister Mia Amor-Motley, once again able to achieve a clean sweep in yesterday's general election.
I think a lot of people have underestimated the power of Tobago nationalism.
If the government is afraid to say it, I, Martin George, I am saying it this morning on your show, Andy, there will be no carnival before Ash Wednesday.
Grab a cup of coffee and start your day right watching AM Prime with Andy Johnson weekdays from 6 a.m. only on your content capital, WESN.
Let your voice be heard. Call Madam Fix It on WESN, the only place that effectively helps you with your woes. Having problems getting onto government agencies, water woes, NIS and pension problems, potholes, and much, much more. Call me, Madam Fix It, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, right here on WESN. Let me fix it for you.
Burning questions, urgent topics. Welcome back to One on One, the show where we tackle the most current and pertinent subjects that are affecting all citizens, where we ask the hard questions and have in-depth conversations. What separates One on One from other talk shows is that the conversation stems from a younger perspective on topics that affect the fabric of our society. One on One, Wednesdays at 10 a.m. on WESN Content Capital.
A reminder from WESN. We urge you to protect yourself and others from the spread of COVID-19. Stay safe by taking some simple precautions. Clean your hands often. Use soap and water or an alcohol-based hand rub. Maintain a safe distance from anyone who is coughing or sneezing. Wear a mask. Don't touch your eyes, nose or mouth. Cover your nose and mouth with your bent elbow or a tissue when you cough or sneeze. Stay at home. If you have a fever, cough and difficulty breathing, seek medical attention. Following the above can help us all to help each other.
Interesting conversation that we were having off air. Thank you for staying with us. I'll let you know in a moment, but let me remind you of the question of the day. Are politics or are people to blame for the racism here in Trinidad and Tobago? Now, have your thoughts and opinions heard? You can answer the question, or if there's anything else that you'd like to contribute to this morning's discussion, feel free to call in 623-9376. Unfortunately, we still have only one phone line that's down due to the incompetence of TSTT, but I wouldn't apologize on their behalf. I just leave it. You know what I'm talking about. But whilst we wait for the calls, we were having this discussion off air, and I thought it's valuable to raise the fact that when politicians are losing ground, when they've messed up in a horrendous way, or they realize that it's an opportune moment in order to try and grab more support, because our support is not necessarily dwindling, it's just weaker than before. we see this talk about racial division and hatred becoming more and more part of the conversation. And I believe, in my opinion, over the last week and a half, that's what we've seen. Kemiel, I'll come to you very shortly, but we have a caller on the line with us from Tobago. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I want to know what is the difference between politics and people.
When we termed politics, we meant political leaders, politicians, and though they are people as well, we use the term people to basically describe you and I, the common man on the street, not political leaders on a political platform.
Okay. And racism. What is racism and who is considered a racist? What qualifies you to be a racist? Is there racism and racist people in Trinidad and Tobago?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a question that we're asking your opinion of.
I guess it would depend on how you say. I know that one other caller, he has a very different views of racism to mine. I don't necessarily want to debate him. So we would be willing to take whatever your view is on racism.
So racism and racist depend on how the individual look at it, right?
Okay.
Well, the definition, yes.
Go on, elaborate a bit further.
Okay. No, I am asking questions. No, I'm not so intelligent. That's why I look at the station.
well, thank you for that, sir. It's just, what is racism is unfortunately something that is now debated. I tend to go with the basic English definition, but there is more complicated thoughts on it.
I tend to be confused because I am an African, right?
Uh-huh.
And if I tell my African brother that he's a nigger, it isn't considered to be racism, right? But if my partner, they say that to African, they say it's racism, and I have a problem with that.
You're right.
It's the same words to the same individual.
Yeah.
I have a problem with that.
Yeah. Caller, thank you very much. I'm going to close that line to give other people a call. But you have a very good point. And the reason why is because I myself often get confused. That is why earlier in the week we had a conversation on the fact that in instances, perhaps society has become too sensitive, to certain things. And you have raised a very valuable point in relation to a term that is often deemed derogatory, but the reason being is that it goes back to the historical perspective. Let me not get too much into that.
So I'll just say quick, we have another caller from Tobago. I believe we're going to now get into what is racism discussion. I'll just say that, I'm not necessarily going to call it racism, but when somebody of the same race shows prejudice against you, so black on black prejudice, or Indian on Indian prejudice, I think that is something that we also underestimate. Because I have a friend, he has lived through that. He's not worried about non-Afro-Trinidadians being racist to him. Part of what he has to live with is other Afro-Trinidadians being prejudiced against him.
So then you have to wonder if classism or the perception of classism is also a form of racism. It's a form of discrimination, but is it a form of racism?
And maybe we confuse the two.
Call on the line with us from Tobago. Good morning.
And good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir. We're doing well.
Good. Very, very powerful subject matter this morning, and I appreciate your guest that you had on. And of course, Mr. Small, I'm not going to get into the definition of racism as I understand it to be. I'll leave it alone. I understand where you guys are going with the discussion and the use of the word racism. I understand how you're using it and what you mean by it. In terms of the bringing together and the melting of the Indo and African populations here in Trinidad and Tobago to make a red, black, and white group, and let's forget about I'm African, you Indo. That would never happen. And here's why that can never happen. And I'm reading this from Wikipedia, the demographics of Trinidad and Tobago, the Indo-Trinidadian and Tobagonians. Through cultural preservation groups, Trinidadians of Indian descent maintain many of their religions, customs, traditions, and language. You see, when the Indo-Trinidad was brought here, they were brought as indentured servants. They were never stripped of their culture, stripped of their name. They weren't deculturized. So they still stand on their square. So they still socialize their children according to their culture. The majority do. At least 80% of Indians are still Hindus. The African, on the other hand, was brought here and stripped off of our square. We were deculturized. We never reculturized. So a group that is deculturized is a weakened group because you're not planted in your culture. You're using someone else's culture, and that culture doesn't really belong to you. It's like taking a plant that is planted in alkaline soil that needs alkaline soil to thrive and planting it in acidic soil. Another plant will thrive in acidic soil, that's where it belongs, but a plant that needs alkaline soil will not thrive in an acidic soil. It may survive for a while, but it will not thrive. So when you have those two groups now, and you're talking about trying to melt those two groups as is, that will never work. What has to happen now is the African group has to get back on their square, because a relationship is about equality. You can't have a relationship if both halves are not equal to each other in their respective values. So that is what has to happen first. So when I made my comment a few days ago about the Africans needing now to come together and circle the wagon and deal with their cultural issue, that cannot be dealt with by the Indians.
Yeah.
They can't deal with the African culture. The Africans have to do that. And then once the Africans get back on their square, then both groups, the Indians are still on their square. So the both groups now, from that position of equality with each other, can now build a nation of red, black, and white. That's my comment this morning.
Caller, thank you very much. We need to have a conversation off here sometime to expand on that. But I thank you very much, caller.
That is a very interesting. I'll let Camille talk, but I just want to say that is a very interesting perspective, and I'll explain why if we have time.
Caller, sorry, Camille, my apologies.
Yeah, sure. So the second caller from Tobago, I share the same sentiment. It's an interesting perspective that I think can be developed more. But to the first caller, I think he asked a very interesting question. I know you all would have hopped on a particular part of it, which is the definition of racism, what people may consider to be racism. However, when he started by asking people or politics, I took that to mean that in politics, there is a certain culture, the culture of politics, and then I also looked at the aspect of if he meant people being the political leaders. Is it that the political leaders being the people are the ones pushing it, or is it because they now fall into the political realm that they push the culture of politics? So I found that interesting in terms of his contribution. Well, the question that he asked, rather.
Yeah, I think based on what Camille said, it's almost as though you get a similar, if not the same question, but the meanings are kind of flipped from the perspective.
Yeah.
We have a caller on the line with us from Chaguanas. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning,
Professor.
I personally don't think we have real racism in Trinidad. We have race talk. I grew up in Chaguanas here, which is a mixed place, central Chaguanas. I went to school in Port of Spain, and I never meet any serious racism. I met a lot of discrimination. Right? And that is what we had to look at. The people would have tried to discriminate me sometime our own race. But we don't seem to do that. And finally, yesterday, while you laugh, you make me forget my point. I let somebody else make a point. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, caller. But I appreciate that call again. Discrimination from your own race. That happens.
But I also like, Professor, the point that you made from the perspective that in Trinidad, perhaps there exists no racism. There's just race talk. But then, are we separating it, or is race talk racism in itself? Camille, you have a point.
What I would say is race talk is racism because it starts home. It starts when you sit around the table with your family and they share their perspectives. You think that January 6th happened in the United States just like that? Things would have been built in a particular momentum would have been built. So when you're in grade listen to your child, eventually in the coming years, we will begin to see even worse things happening.
I mean,
that's where it starts.
To me, I always felt as though we don't have anything like the KKK. We don't have people being murdered because one racial group doesn't even have the right to vote. Everybody has the right to vote.
Well, exactly.
No, but not systemically like how it is.
Not systemic, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm talking about the systems being in place to kind of block it. You might get it, but not on that same level.
I want to make a point afterwards. Actually, two, but I have a caller on the line with us from Port of Spain. Good morning, caller.
Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning, sir.
Morning.
I think this discussion this morning is very timely. Timely from the point of view that Trinidad and Tobago, throughout its independent history, has never once seriously had a commission or any serious national investigation to examine the issue of race and racism in the country.
Mm-hmm.
We might have had university exercises or what have you.
Yeah.
But this thing about where people could talk to racism, for example, is this, if you have a situation, Sean, where there's a job available, and the person who presides is an African person, and when the time comes, he gives the job to an African, that is not discrimination, that is racism. Because he, from his perspective, he's giving the job to one of his own. And conversely, if there's an Indian presiding, and he gives the job to an Indian, what do we have? Now, that abounds by, that is like flood waters on the plains in Trinidad. That goes on every day in this country. The other issue is this, that your groundings has much to do with your orientation. I hear people say that they grew up in a place where it didn't have anything. Well, I have always said to people that Barataria is perhaps the microcosm of Trinidad and Tobago. Because we do not, I grew up in Barataria and I played with Indians, I played with Africans, I played with Douglas. You know, as a younger man, I had Indian girlfriends, African girlfriends, Douglas girlfriends, you name it. And it went across the board the other way. I had all kinds of friends. So that the issue of race and Indian and African never came to me until I was very much into the politics of Trinidad and Tobago. And it is only when I began to understand how the PNM had developed its party, and it was not by chance Kamaluddin Mohammed was a deputy political leader, Errol Mahabir, and so on and so forth. Because the PNM was a predominantly African party, the leadership of the party has always found space at the top to encourage the Indian Trinidadian to come into the party. And the PNM, as a national institution, has always built bridges into Indo-Trinidadian. I don't know the same has been true for the UNC or the predecessor parties to the UNC. Save and except under Mr. Pandey, when he reached across the aisles to everybody, and he brought in Carlos John to contest the election, the only look that we are seeing with Mrs. Bissesso on that is Jolene John. And the question is, can you ever perceive Jolene John being the political leader of the UNC?
Interesting point.
That is a question you all asked me some weeks ago.
Yeah.
And conversely, I'm asking you the question this morning. And in like manner, can you perceive an Indo-Trinidadian? For example, can Rohan Sinanan or Faris Alwari emerge to be the political leader of the PNM? That is more likely than the other side.
Thank you, caller. Thank you very much. Have a good
Thank
day.
you, caller.
Good point. I'll answer your question shortly, but the point I wanted to make to the caller before is that you would have faced discrimination. Now, the definition of discrimination is not racism. And the definition of racism, it seems as though it's become subjective. The fact is, racism is a form of discrimination.
Yeah.
And to answer the question from the caller from Port of Spain in relation to Jaylene John, my answer is simple. And people may get upset, but I can't help but think this. Would she be allowed to become political leader of the United National Congress?
Flip side is, I think Ronan Sinana and Farah Sawari are weak candidates to be political leader of any party, just in general.
But they might quicker be allowed,
right?
you know?
Well, yes. Whether they should, I don't know. But I think there are better Indo-Trinidadian politicians to be a political leader, regardless of party, than those two candidates.
Well, but you know, I know the point that the caller from Port is trying to make. Camille, hold your thoughts.
Sure.
Not last caller this morning. Sorry, but we have a caller now with us from Tunapuna. Good morning. Hello. Good morning.
Yes. Good morning, gentlemen.
Hi.
Good morning. To remind the last caller, when Eric Williams was the Prime Minister, as he quite rightly said, we had Kamaluddin Mohammed and we had Edward Mahaba as his deputy.
Mm-hmm.
Can he explain to me why it is none of them did not get the Prime Ministership, but it gave it to George Chambers?
Mm-hmm.
But putting that aside, I would like to see in this program we be a little more balanced in judging leaders of the party where race is concerned. Right? They had NAR, they had People Partnership, and they had UNC. That is three different political parties. Right? And we had the PNM. The PNM had remained in power for over 85% of the time. I am asking you all, I prefer to talk more about the economics, the business, and more other things about the country, rather than only race that you all are agitating, like the rest of the media in this country.
All right, caller, thank you.
Stop this nonsense.
Thank you, caller. Thank you. Now, I hold on. The reason why I cut your call on purpose, caller, is because, again, well, we have time. We have time for one more caller. But the thing is that I hear you, but the point that you're making is exactly the reason why we're having conversations like this. Is because I don't think that we should be afraid to have such conversations like this anymore. And we all want to talk about the economy. As pointed out by our guest this morning, you know, we need to speak about infrastructure, we need to speak about education, you know, we need to speak about the economy. But what you've said there alludes to the fact that, yes, there is indeed racial tension and racial division, and it's something that we need to address. So unfortunately, even though you might want to do that, we have to do this.
Yeah, our guest and the clip we played before the guest basically said that point, that the important issues get sidetracked for the race talk because the country and the politics respond to that greater. And part of the conversation, or this part of the conversation, this chapter today, Friday's chapter, is to point that out, continue to try to unpack it so we can move on. But unfortunately, caller, I don't think it's that easy for us to just not talk about it. It will come back because the national narrative will pull it back.
So unfortunately, caller, we will speak about the economy, we'll speak about education, but again, we'll be speaking about racism sometime in the future. So I'm really sorry that you would prefer to see that, but you know, we're an all-encompassing show, we're an all-around show, and we have to focus not on just specifics and particulars, but everything as a nation. Camille, we have a call on the line, but I don't know if there's a point you want to make quickly.
After the call, I can probably make the point.
Oh, okay, sure. Last caller for the morning from Claxton Bay. Good morning, caller.
Morning to the panel there. Morning,
Good morning, Mr. Fisherman.
This name calling and slave, this name calling, slave trade, name calling, and all this kind of things. Just a diversion, you know.
Yeah.
Check the Judicial report. We'll not see about that. The Hamadism make the pariah, the donor, the
yes.
We'll not see about these things.
Yes.
Just a diversion to get away for the really fear, you know.
Yeah, and you're absolutely
right. It's just a, how to put it, I don't know how to put it, but it's a diversion.
Yeah.
Basically, Camille made a point. I'll expand on it for the explanation, but yes, Mr. Fisherman.
Thank you, Mr. Fisherman. But you're right.
That is, yes.
That is what we said. We said simply enough, when politicians are losing their grip, when they've messed up, when they've really messed up and they realize that their support is weakening, then they come with this race talk, and you're right, to create a distraction and diversion. And the unfortunate thing is that both sides fall into that trap. Not just one side, both sides fall into that trap quite often. Kemuel?
Yes. So to the call upon Port of Spain, he would have mentioned that your grounding has a lot to do with how you perceive things right now, and that's exactly it. So when I was making the point earlier that these conversations, people don't just get up one day and say, I am going to be a racist today, or I'm going to be a racist for 2 hours out of the day. It's something that was taught from dinner table talk, living room talk, and then it spills over into what we are seeing right now. And if we as society continue to accept that is the way it's in Trinidad and Tobago, and that's how our politics should go, then we are in for a shocking reality in the years to come.
Yes.
Yeah. I just had to also point out, the caller from Port of Spain on a previous show, it's not as though he's saying in the PNM we're going to get an Indo-Trinidadian leader, easy, easy, easy. He's not saying that. He's just saying it's a little more likely to happen than under the UNC, and he just gave Basil Pandey's administration props for being a bit more diverse and integrating Afro-Trinidadians more into his cabinet and having a more diverse cabinet and slate than the current opposition slate. Now, with that said, I think going back to the second caller from Tobago's point of deculturalization, I do wonder to what extent that could be why. Because, we had a caller that alluded to, he might have overblown the statistics, but he alluded to the fact that there's a high degree of crime in the Afro-Trinidadian community. And we know there's also a high degree of crime in the African-American community in the States. And both communities, obviously, a lot of them are transplants from slavery. So I do wonder if the deculturalization argument has some significance there, because things like culture, tradition, religion, values, anything like that could translate those values and entrench them in society helps act as almost like a fail-safe. Like, you don't know what to do in this situation, but you have your values as fail-safe, as taught to you by your parents, who got taught from their parents, and all the way up your ancestors. And when you break that chain, it's harder for those values to be ingrained. And it's not to say that Afro-Trinidadian, Trinbagonian, and African Americans don't have values. It's just that it's a bit, the foundation is shakier because of what happened with slavery. Now, I'm not saying this is a definite thing, but I think it's an interesting discussion to have because it is a common thread, and it could help explain part of why we see a common result.
Well, as we conclude on this particular conversation, it's very important to have this because often we speak about Eric Williams, we speak about George Chambers, Basil Pandey, we speak about pre-independence, and I think that many times we forget history conveniently. It seems as though we only remember what we want to remember when we want to remember it. Having this conversation today is important because as young people growing up in a society in which we're realizing there's a lot of division. Deem it as an ism, if it's racism, nepotism, classism, however you may want to deem it, the fact is division remains. And as my colleague Kemuel pointed out, we're in for a rude awakening if it is that we do not try at this particular point more than ever to have these discussions to try and find a solution to the situation. And overall here in Trinidad and Tobago, think about it. There's more unity. Say what you want. There's more unity right now within unions than there's probably amongst the general population, right? You might not see unity in political parties, but why is it that, Afro-Trinidadians, Indo-Trinidadians, I keep stressing on this, cannot come together besides CPL or besides football? I never understood that. So, caller from Tunapuna, you want to have a conversation about the economy? No problem. You want to have a conversation about the roads, about, the state of education? No problem. But if we're going to have those conversations, let's talk about an issue that has plagued us far longer than independence Trinidad and Tobago. We need to have those discussions as well. Anyway, Kemuel Pascal, thank you very much for joining us this morning on the program. Always a pleasure to hear you and have your contribution, my friend.
Thank you very kindly. It's always a pleasure to be here. And I'd just like to leave you over these 3 questions. Where are we, Trinidad and Tobago? Where do we want to go? And have we lost our identity? I think you all should ponder upon those questions over the weekend as we prepare for next week.
Well, Camille, I look forward to next week Tuesday's discussion if that's the case. Sean Michael Small, thank you very much.
Yes, when people don't have good talking points, when politicians don't have good talking points, they resort to sensational, emotional arguments. That's what we saw this week. But you know what? It's the end of the week. Today is a good day to have some Nescafe. So I invite all of our viewers to enjoy a good cup with me.
When politicians say my brothers and sisters, folks, I plead with you, let it be true to the word. Camille is a brother, Sean is a brother, everybody, even the caller from Tunapuna. My true brother from Pity Valley, I hope to hear from you again soon, sir. We miss you very much. And to our sister as well, from Diego Martin, we haven't heard from in a long time, Ms. Nalini Udit. Folks, it's a good day to have a good day. It's a good day to be true brothers and sisters. And have a great weekend. Please God, we'll see you again on Monday morning. Bye-bye.